Welcome to my lecture on grammatical theory. The goals of this course are first to get you some basic ideas about grammar, then the introduction to various grammatical theories and approaches, the discussion of their pros and cons, and as a third goal, enlightenment and the attainment of supernatural powers. You may wonder about the third point, but there's this ancient wisdom a colleague of mine found. I will read it to you. Grammar is the gate to freedom, the medicine for the diseases of language, the purifier of all sciences. It spreads its light over them. It is the first rung on the ladder which leads to the realization of supernatural powers and the straight royal road for those who seek freedom. It's a very old quote from year 650, and of course it's the truth. The first part of the lecture will deal with the motivation of syntax and formal syntax in particular, and then we will go on to phrase structure grammars, but today we just have a look at some terminology and like head and constituent and so on. The literature is my grammar theory book, the chapter 1 of it. If you prefer German, you can read the respective chapter in the German textbooks, the HPC textbook or the grammatical theory textbook, or you can, if you prefer English, you can go to the English version. There's a 4th edition of it that just appeared 2 weeks ago, or you can read the Chinese version if you want to. So why syntax? The general idea in nowadays linguistics is that we are dealing with science in a Caesarean sense. So we have form meaning pairs. We have a certain utterance or certain linguistic sign, and it's coming with a certain meaning. So the question is, we have words and word groups and sentences, and the question is, how do we establish the connection between form and meaning? And if we could say that language is a finite enumeration of word sequences, then we could say, okay, there is just a finite number of these pairs and we can learn them by heart, and then we learned our language and that's it. Pretty boring. If that would be the case, I wouldn't have a job, or at least not the one I have now. If we assume that there is a maximal length for sentences, let's say 100,000 words, and if we assume that there is a maximum length for words, let's say 100,000 phonemes or letters or whatever you want, then language is finite. You can compute the number of possible permutations, and since not all of these permutations are well-formed sentences, we have even less. So it's a finite set. So is my idea a cool one? Like just listing all these different combination of words or sounds? It's not. So if you look at sentences like one, dieser Satz geht weiter und weiter und weiter und weiter. This sentence goes on and on and on. There is no sense in which we want to say, okay, this is a natural sentence, sentence belonging to our language, and if you go on just for 2 more steps, then it's not, right? So that would sort of be arbitrary. We can also have interesting ways of embedding. So about the sentence, ein Satz ist ein Satz, we can say that this sentence is a sentence. So ein Satz ist also ein Satz. It's like this, maybe you know these pictures where you have a little dwarf holding a button, and on this button there's a little dwarf holding a button, and so on. So like a recursive embedding. So the point is that we can form enormously many sentences. Restriction on complexity would be arbitrary. So in order to deal with this situation, people have distinguished between two aspects of language that basically goes also back to Saussure, and Chomsky had a slightly different version of it. So we distinguish between competence and performance, and competence is a knowledge about what is possible. So something like a sentence is a sentence can be embedded in a bigger sentence. So this is something we know about grammars when we are competent speakers of a language. And then there's performance, that is the actual usage of this knowledge. And that may be different. So there are limits like memory, load, and so on. So, and there's also the sentence length limit, right? So we cannot form sentences that are 100,000 words long. It's just not possible. You cannot do it, and nobody would understand the sentence anyway. There are people who are claiming that we can form infinitely long sentences. This is just wrong. It's they didn't get the lessons on formal grammar, and don't believe them. So Chomsky never said that we can form infinitely long sentences. What he did say is that languages are infinite sets. That's different, and it's a crucial, really important difference. But even this may be disputed. So there's some discussion of this in the grammar theory textbook at the end in the discussion part. Okay, more on competence performance distinction. This is a quote from the book by Astrid Lindgren, The Six Bullerby Children. It's in German because there seem to be no ebooks available. So I looked for that yesterday. So if you have an English copy around and you can give me the English quote, I would be very happy. So for now, it's the German version, and I read it to you and then translate it. Und wir beeilten uns, den Jungen zu erzählen, wir hätten von Anfang an gewusst, dass es nur eine Erfindung von Lasse gewesen sei. Und da sagte Lasse, die Jungen hätten gewusst, dass wir gewusst hätten, es sei nur eine Erfindung von ihm. Das war natürlich gelogen, aber vorsichtshalber sagten wir hätten gewusst, die Jungen hätten gewusst, dass wir gewusst hätten, dass es sei nur eine Erfindung von Lasse. Und da sagten die Jungen, ja, jetzt schaffe ich es nicht mehr aufzuzählen, aber es waren so viele gewusst, dass man ganz verwirrt davon werden konnte, wenn man es hörte. So this part of the children, the Bullerby children, is about boys and girls, and boys said that they knew something, and then the girls said that they knew that the boys knew, and then they said that they knew that the girls knew that the boys knew, and so on. So this shows that you can embed these statements about the knowledge states of other people as often as you want to, but then the girl says, okay, but at a certain point we lost track, and that's performance, right? Then our brains don't get it anymore. Okay, so this is one thing, right? The separation of competence and performance, and the idea is that we can do things in principle, like recursive embedding, building complex structure, except that we can't because there's a limit in our brain, but we don't want to name the boundary explicitly, right? So we leave that open. We have an abstraction about what is possible. And so in principle, we could form infinitely many sentences, but we can't. Okay, so more reasons for assuming syntax, for assuming structure in language. So one is creativity. We can form sentences we never heard before. So it doesn't make sense to assume that all we use in language is sort of stored somewhere. So we can build new structures, new sentences, and there must be structure and patterns. That's what we can conclude from this. There is direct evidence for syntactic structures. We can show that we are following certain rules by observing children. Children often use rules wrongly, or rather they use their own rules. So what children have as their rules is a generalization over what they heard so far, and what they can come up with in terms of generalizations is also limited by their limited brain sizes and their brain capacities. And so they have different rules from the ones we have for a certain time. So then at a certain point it converges. So I'm using some examples for morphology because that's the most easiest for now. In German, there's an unmarked plural for some nouns like beggar or Ritter, Bagger, not beggar, Bagger and Ritter. So the plural of Bagger, one Bagger is, or ein Bagger ist zwei Bagger und ein Ritter und zwei Ritter. So there is no ending for these nouns. And children at a certain age just append an S. So guck mal die Baggers, guck mal die Ritters. And I told my son and said, no, it's not Ritters, it's Ritter. But Daddy, it's two of them. So the kid really had developed his rule for building the plural and said, okay, it's two, it has to have an S or some ending at least. And S is often used in German. Okay, for what is coming now, as a side remark, I often use German examples. The reason is that English is so boring. It's well, rather strict constituent order, certain things about presence of subject and so on, that basically also I believe are responsible for misdevelopments in linguistics. So claims that hold for English were transferred to other languages where they don't hold. Analysis were carried over to other languages where they didn't make sense. And so I work on German and I kept that in the textbook. People said, one reviewer said, why German? You have an international audience for the textbook. And I decided to stick to German because it's good for explaining certain phenomena. And as for the slides, I tried to gloss everything, but sometimes it just doesn't fit on the slide, and I didn't do that. So if there's something missing, then everything is glossed in the textbook, of course, and you can look things up there. Okay, so why syntax? One more point is that we sort of have to get the meaning for a certain utterance, and that can be done if we know the structure, the way things are combined. So if we look at 3, der Mann kennt diese Frau, the man knows this woman, how can we know what is what? And which noun phrase plays which role in the sentence. Okay, so if we look at 4, we see that there are certain syntactic aspects or morphosyntactic aspects that help us decoding sentences. So here you see something you cannot do in English, right? It's interesting in German. So yeah, we have 2 sentences. Die Frau kennt die Mädchen. The woman knows the girls. And die Frau kennt die Mädchen. Which means the opposite. The girls know the woman. So this is strange, isn't it? And it's just this little thing here. The en and the t is the difference between these sentences, and a part of this, they are completely parallel, right? So, and the phenomenon that is at work here is subject-verb agreement. You see it in C and D. Die Frau schläft, die Mädchen schlafen, right? So that's the subject, that's also the subject. And what happened here is that the object is fronted here, and here the subject is fronted. That's nothing unusual, but here the object is fronted. But due to subject-verb agreement, we can detect, infer from the grammatical system that this must be the subject, although it's in a position where one may not expect this to be the subject. Okay, so this is, it's not just semantics, right? If we didn't have syntax, we would be lost. We couldn't decode that difference. So there must be some grammar. We have grammar as humans, so that's clear by now, I hope. And now the question is, why should we do that in a formal way? And there's this very famous Chomsky quote from 1957, where he said, okay, precisely constructed models for linguistic structure can play an important role, both negative and positive, in the process of discovery itself. By pushing a precise but inadequate formulation to an unacceptable conclusion, we can often expose the exact source of this inadequacy and consequently gain a deeper understanding of the linguistic data. More positively, a formalized theory may automatically provide solutions for many problems other than those for which it was explicitly designed. Obscure and intuition-bound notions can neither lead to absurd conclusions nor provide new and correct ones, and hence they fail to be useful in 2 important respects. I think that some of those linguists who have questioned the value of precise and technical development of linguistic theory have failed to recognize the productive potential of the method of rigorously stating a proposed theory and applying it strictly to linguistic material with no attempt to avoid unacceptable conclusions by ad hoc adjustments or loose formulation. A similar quote from David Doughty, working in categorical grammar, as is frequently pointed out, but cannot be overemphasized, an important goal for formalization and formalization in linguistics is to enable subsequent researchers to see the defects of an analysis as clearly as its merits. Only then can progress be made efficiently. So these are the quotes. Chomsky's quote was the beginning of a new era in linguistics. It was very important, and he later decided that formalization is not that important, and there were arguments with proponents of generalist phrase structure grammar and other frameworks, but that's the way it is. So he changed his mind in the 80s. So to sum up, what does an analysis mean? Which predications does it make? Exclusion of alternative proposals. So that's the key points that you get from formalization. you have a clearer picture of what authors mean, or what ideas grammarians have if stuff is formalized. Okay, so in the next part, the remainder of this lecture, I want to introduce some basic notions, basic terminology, and we start with phrases, with constituency tests. So if we look at strings, sentences, we realize that the words in them can be grouped into phrases or constituents, as they are called. So here you have an example. Dass Max glaubt, dass Julius weiß, dass Otto behauptet, dass Karl vermutet, dass Richard bestätigt, dass Friederike lacht. That Max believes that Julius knows that Otto claims that blah, blah, blah. This is like a Russian doll or like an onion. So you have smaller units embedded within bigger units. And it's of the same kind, right? So if you peel up the outer layer of an onion, you still have an onion, depending on how long you do that. Okay, so language is not as boring as Russian dolls. No, they are exciting, I admit that. But language is even more exciting, right? So you can combine things of different types. And in a Russian doll, there's always just one other Russian doll. But in natural language, we can go more complex. So let's have a look at 6. All students read during this time books. All the students are reading books at this time. So what are the ways we can group that? You may stop the presentation here and think about that for a minute, or maybe 2 or 5. But this is basically Linguistics 101. You probably can do that. Maybe if you can't, then you should take one of the BA courses in addition. So this is one way to group the stuff. So, well, I used a box model to visualize the grouping. All words are in boxes, and sometimes 2 words are in a bigger box, and sometimes 3. So the most complex thing is this here. That's a preposition. We have a noun phrase here, so determiner and noun combined to a bigger unit, and that forms a prepositional phrase. So this is something you learn in school, right? So I think 3rd class, 4th class, you start to talk about prepositions and how, part of speech stuff and how things are grouped. And you learn a lot of wrong things, at least in German school. But you have a basic idea that there are groups of verbs and how that is supposed to work. But we are doing science here, right? Science. And we want to have tests, like they are applied and they give us results, and we know, okay, that's a phrase that this stuff has to go into one box. So how are these tests? Are there tests, and how do they work? And what can we do about it? So the term is that it's constituents, these sequences of words, and I have this bit of terminology. When I talk about word sequences, then this is an arbitrary linear sequence of words which do not necessarily need to have any syntactic or semantic relationship to each other. And if I talk about word groups or constituents or phrases, then one or more words are referred to that form a structural unit. Oops, okay, that's German. So which constituency tests do we know? Again, you may stop here and think about the question for a minute or two. So this is an enumeration of constituents you should know. So it's substitution, pronominalization, question formation. So that's one group of tests, omission of elements, permutation of elements, fronting, and coordination. So that are some of the tests, and I will walk you through the tests in the following part of the lecture. Okay, so first one, substitution. If it is possible to replace a sequence of words in a sentence with a different sequence of words and the acceptability of the sentence remains ineffective, then this constitutes evidence for the fact that each sequence of words forms a constituent. So this is, you have to be careful when looking at these tests. They go in one direction. So if you can do that, then the result may be a constituent. So this is evidence for this being a constituent. I emphasize this because some people formulated these tests in the other direction, and then it's wrong. Then they are wrong. There's discussion in the literature by Tim Osborne where he says, "Oh, this phrase structure crap is wrong. They got it all wrong, and these constituents tests. And look, I have these examples here, and according to them, these should be constituents, but they aren't." And he didn't get the logic of the test right. So that's sort of a reason to be careful about these definitions. Okay, so if you can substitute word sequences against other stuff, other sequences, then this points into the direction that the two things you substituted for each other are constituents. So kennt den Mann, kennt eine Frau. You can substitute den Mann and eine Frau, and this seems to suggest that den Mann and eine Frau are constituents. Then we have pronominalization. That's basically the same. You replace something by a pronoun. Der Mann schläft, schläft. A sequence of words that can be elicited by a question forms a constituent. Der Mann arbeitet, wer arbeitet. Permutation, if a sequence of words can be moved without adversely affecting the acceptability of a sentence in which it occurs, then it's an indication that this word sequence forms a constituent. Dass keiner dieses Kind kennt, dass dieses Kind keiner kennt. So we have swapped keiner and dieses. That's possible in German. It's a language with scrambling, so we can swap subject and object, and this is an application of the permutation test. Okay, damn. So something is missing here. I have to fix that. Okay. Fronting is a very important test for German. German is a so-called verb second language, so we form verb second sentences by, as we will discuss later, by fronting the verb, putting it in initial position, and putting something else in front of it. And this something else can be anything. It can be an object, can be part of another clause, and so on. So here you have examples. Alle Studenten lesen während der vorlesungsfreien Zeit Bücher. Bücher lesen wir, alle Studenten während der vorlesungsfreien Zeit. So subject and object can be fronted. But what is impossible is to have both subject and object in initial position. Alle Studenten Bücher lesen während dieser Zeit is out. So it can just be one constituent. Then we have the coordination test. If two sequences of words can be conjoined, then this suggests that each sequence forms a constituent. Der Mann und die Frau arbeiten. So we have man and woman as two similar nominal phrases, and they are combined via with a conjunction, and we get a bigger NP out of that. So this is not an introductory course, it's just a repetition part, so that you sort of have a closed or self-contained course. So I will not go into the details with these tests, but there's a warning slide here. The tests are not 100% reliable. So basically all of these tests have problems, which is sort of a disaster for science, because you don't even have 100% reliable tests for your basic building blocks. But it's not that bad, because we can isolate the areas where there are problems. For instance, with expletive pronouns, they are not really replaceable and stuff like that. There are things that cannot be moved around in a sentence and so on. Coordination is a big problem. So if you are interested in this, you may go to the literature and read up in the respective sections. It's clear that these tests cannot be applied blindly. Okay, some more terminology. Ahead of a phrase is a very important concept for all the theories we are dealing with. So, for example, the definition. Ahead determines the most important properties of the phrase. So it's the one central things that says how the phrase behaves in its external distribution, and also how the phrase looks internally. So it's in English, it's easy to talk about this because the word head has a meaning that corresponds to this notion of head. So there is the head of department, right? So that's the most important person in a department. And let's assume there's a Halloween party and the head of department decides who dresses up in which way. So that's similar in sentences. The head is a verb, and the head tells the other participants in the sentence, you dress nominative, you dress dative, you dress accusative. So this element says who does what in the clause. So examples are verbs in sentences. We already had that. Träumt dieser Mann, erwartet diesen Mann, hilft diesem Mann. So here the verb requires different cases. This is another example with a prepositional phrase. In diesem Haus, here the prepositional phrase governs again the noun phrase contained in the prepositional phrase, and it says, okay, you have to be dative for a specific meaning of the preposition. So that's a locative. There's also the option of having an accusative, but then it's a directional preposition. It's a different preposition. And then we have ein Mann, a man, and I assume that this is a nominal phrase, so the noun is the head. So there's a long discussion about this issue. Across frameworks, there have been proposals for determiner phrases and nominal phrases. So some assume that the determiner, also ein, is the head, but the traditional view is that man is the head. That something is a traditional view doesn't mean that it's right, but I assume it's right, and I have some papers about that by now written together with Antonio Machikawi Premier. And if you want, we can discuss this at some point. Okay, then we have the term projection. The combination of a head with other material is called projection of the head. A complete projection is a maximal projection. A maximal projection of a finite verb is a sentence. Okay, so let's get on. Let's get a bit more complicated. We saw the box model, right? So you grouped words in a sentence into phrases, and that was depicted by boxes. Now, what you see here is a box representation that has little labels here. And if you moved to a new flat in your life at least once, you know that it makes sense to put labels on the boxes with your stuff, right? So if you don't do that, you will end up with 30 boxes, and you're looking for your Schlafanzug, what is it? The thing you need for sleeping during the night, and it's in the last box. So you have to unpack everything until you find this thing. And so labeling boxes is a good idea. What we do is we put the label according to the most important element in the box. So this is a determiner, this is a noun, and the whole box is an NP because the noun is the most important thing. Here we have two NPs and a verb on this level, and what we put here is VP because that's the most important thing. So now the funny thing about language is if you like Lego, then you like linguistics, I hope. You can like linguistics without liking Lego. That's the same thing as we had with a constituency test, right? The implication goes one way. If Lego, then language. Okay. The point is, it doesn't matter what exactly is in the box. So can function as an NP. Der Mann can function as an NP. The man, so he is a pronoun. The man from Stuttgart, who we know. All of that can be inserted into the same slot. So if we have a sentence like lacht, then we can replace by der Mann aus Stuttgart, by der Mann aus Stuttgart, den wir kennen. So all of that is possible. So it's basically building blocks that can be fit into slots. Okay, now a short moment of fun. It doesn't work always. Der Mann liest einen Aufsatz is fine, but die Männer liest einen Aufsatz is out. Des Mannes liest einen Aufsatz, it's also not possible. So again, you can stop the presentation here and think about these sentences and why they are bad. If you didn't stop, well, even if you stopped, I tell you now. So the second, there's a problem with subject-verb agreement, and here we have genitive, where we should have nominative. So these sentences are out, even though these things here are NPs, but they don't fit in there. So what do we do? Do you have an idea? We sort of should extend our Lego system to make these, I don't know, these little bumps there more diverse, so that not everything fits in there, although it looks similar. maybe I'm going too far with my analogy here. The point is we have to write down the features that are responsible for this difference. And that's basically, this is linguistics, right? So we have to notice that there are determiners in the nominative, and there is inflection on the nouns, and that they have to match, and that only those things can be inserted in these slots that correspond in their properties. And this is basically the reason why these categories are there, so that we have gender in German, that we have case in German. So that the only way we know about that is that we see that these elements have a different distribution, right? So from that, we can conclude that there are differences there, and we give these differences names. So that's what Dan Everett did when he was in the Amazonas. So he didn't know anything about Piraha, and was flown in there with an airplane, and then he was standing there in the jungle and asked them questions. So he said, okay, I have this leaf and I'll drop it, and what is this in Piraha? And I have this stone and I drop it, what is this in Piraha? So then he could conclude, okay, the one sequence, he pronounced it in the movie, you can download it from his webpage and have a look. If from the sound sequences, he said, okay, this sound sequence corresponds to this situation, this other sound sequence to the other situation. The difference in the situations was stone versus leaf, and so I know what these words mean, and then he can go on about the distribution, and if he knows the words, he can detect forms of these words if they exist, and so on, right? So this is the puzzle aspect of linguistics and the big Lego game we are all in. Okay, so the features of words that are important for the external distribution are copied from the lexical items to bigger word groups, and such features are also called head features. So stuff from the head that is important for the external distribution. Okay, so the next thing we want to look at is arguments. And the constituents are in general in a different relation with their head, and one distinguishes between arguments and adjuncts. This is one of my most favorite questions. Actually, it isn't, but so the question is, what is the difference? And usually people get it wrong, either because they were taught wrong things or because it's difficult to remember things in the correct way. So you may stop here before you go on and think about what you think is the difference between arguments and adjuncts. Okay. I want to start from a logical point of view. So certain elements are part of the meaning of a verb. For example, in situations that described by the verb love, there's a lover and a lovee. And for example, in 16, Kim loves Sandy, we have the love relation, and then Kim and Sandy are the two participants in this relation. This is, now we are in a Master of Linguistics, so you probably had some semantics in your intro course, and this means that you can read this kind of formula. If not, you should, if you're studying in Berlin, you should take a semantic seminar. It's fun. So, and you need it for linguistics, obviously. So these two are called the logical arguments of the verb love. And in many cases, syntactic arguments are logical arguments, but not always. So we will come back to that issue. The term for such relations between heads and arguments is selection or valence. And the concept of valency is transferred from, or was transferred from chemistry to linguistics by a French linguist with the name Tenier. He published, as all French people do, in French, which meant that it was some sort of secret knowledge only available to those who spoke French. But that changed in the 80s. So in the 80s, there was a translation into German by Ulrich Engel. And a lot of people in Germany actually then did dependency grammar, the framework Tenier was working in. And just recently, 5 years ago, it was this huge volume was translated into English. Actually, Ulrich Engel only translated parts of the work, and the first complete translation is the one into English by Sylvia and Kahan and Tim Osborne. And yeah, if you want to read the original or the where this idea come from, then you can now go on and read Tenier's work. So the reason for this terminology is that there's a certain parallel to chemistry. In chemistry, we talk about atoms that form molecules with other atoms, and the combinations, the compounds are stable if electron shells are filled. So we need a certain number of electrons to get a stable molecule. If atoms combine with other atoms, this can lead to completely filled electron layers, which would result in a stable compound. And the valency of an atom is the number of hydrogen atoms that have a valence of 1 that can be combined with an atom of a certain element, or that have 1 electron left. Okay, so oxygen has the valency 2, since it can be combined with 2 hydrogen atoms, forming H2O. So if we look at all the elements, then we can group them into valence classes, and the elements with a certain valence who belong to the same valence class are represented in a column in the periodic system of Mendeleev. So if we transfer that concept to linguistics, we have a head needs certain arguments to enter a stable compound. Words having the same valence, same number and types of arguments are grouped into valence classes, since they behave alike with respect to the combinations they enter. So we have 2 figures here showing the idea. So on the left-hand side, we have water. So we have the oxygen atom on the top and 2 hydrogen atoms at the bottom. And to the left, to the right of it, we have a sentence with a verb love requiring 2 nominal phrases, namely Kim and Sandy. So I hope you get the idea that this is sort of parallel. One thing where this parallel gets a little bit shaky is that the arguments of verbs may be optional. Actually, in most of the cases, or at least for German, most of the arguments don't have to be visible in the sentence. So there are cases where all of them can be omitted. An example for an optional argument is the for PP object, prepositional object of wait. I'm waiting for my man, but we can omit that I'm waiting. So if you have I'm waiting, then you wait for somebody, but you just don't name the person who you are waiting for. So this kind of argument that can be omitted is called optional argument. And if you look at nominal environments, all arguments are basically omittable. Jemand liest diese Bücher, das Lesen dieser Bücher. So here you don't have the subject, the jemand, and das Lesen, so there is no none of the participants named. So far we have seen cases where the syntactic arguments are also logical arguments, but there are other cases, for example, weather verbs, it rains. So there you won't say that the expletive is a semantic argument of the verb. You cannot ask who rains, that's just not possible. So it's generally assumed that these pronouns are not arguments, not semantic arguments of the verb, but they have to be there. If you omit the expletive, the sentence gets ungrammatical. So for syntactic reasons, they have to be there, and therefore they are counted among the valence requirements of a verb. And the same is true for so-called for reflexive that go together with inherently reflexive verbs, like in 20b, Kim erholt sich. You cannot say Kim erholt dich or Kim erholt ihn. So you cannot put anything else in there than a reflexive, and it has to agree. It has to match the subject. Ich erhole mich. Du erholst dich. Erholt sich. So that works like a reflexive pronoun, except that it doesn't fill the semantic slot in recreate. So these things are syntactic arguments, but not logical arguments. Now, what are adjuncts? Adjuncts do not fill a semantic role. Adjuncts are optional. Adjuncts can be iterated. This is something that has to hold for adjuncts. It's not the case that if something is optional, then it has to be an adjunct, right? So if it is an adjunct, it has to be optional, but not the other way around. This is the important thing. This is what people often get wrong with arguments and adjuncts, where you can get confused easily. So let's illustrate these points. In our loving situation, there's a lover and a lovee. Since 3 years, if we add this prepositional phrase to the sentence in 21, then we see that since 3 years is of a different time. Kim loves Sandy since 3 years. So 10-year had this analogy where he said, okay, imagine a theater scene. So if you act a loving event, then somebody has to love something. That's it. This is something you need to know. If you have like somebody eats something, even if you don't name what is eaten, it's always something that is eaten that is involved in an eating event. But you don't need like information about the place or the duration or something. That's not core participants of the event. Okay, so these things are called adjunct, and you can have many of them. So they are optional, then you have none, or you can have 2 or 3 or 4. So this is illustrates the optionality. Kim loves Sandy. Kim loves Sandy since 3 years, since Kim loves Sandy honestly, and you can combine these as well. As I said, this is dangerous. You can have arguments or omit arguments from verbs as well. So they may be optional, but that doesn't mean that they are adjuncts. So if you have gibt den armen Geld, you can omit the Geld, because if you give poor people, then you probably give them money. Some people give them food, but whatever, you give something to them. It's not important. But in a certain way, in a certain situation, when you talk about giving poor people something, and there's a difference, or the option that you give food or that you give money, then you can say, gibt Geld. Or if you don't want to name what is given, and you focus on the aspect of whether somebody wants to give freely or not, then you can say gibt gerne. So he likes giving or something. And when you play card games, you can also say du gibst. So that's a fixed situation where four people are playing, and one is giving the cards and the other three play, and then they take turns, right? So that it's moving who is giving the cards. And if you have that in the imperative, then you could say give, gib, yeah, and then no argument is realized. Yeah, it's due to the grammatical configuration, but still there's no argument. Okay. Adjuncts can be iterated. That's not possible with arguments. Arguments can be combined with their head once. So you cannot have 24, the man sleeps. This is the Lego slots, right? So if the brick is in there, you cannot put another brick in there. It's filled. But with adjuncts, the situation is different. Imagine this dialogue. A says, all gray squirrels are big. So these gray squirrels coming from the US, they don't belong here. They are a little bit bigger than the European squirrels, and they kill them. How do we say that? They cause them to disappear. Anyway, B says, no, I saw a small gray squirrel. And A says, but all small gray squirrels are ill. And B says, no, I saw a healthy small gray squirrel. So you can continue that until one of the, or both of the participants in a discussion die, right? Or they run out of adjectives that make sense there. But there is no structural limit on adding adjectives to nouns, although Schinkel believes that to be the case, but it's not. Okay. So some further examples for adjuncts. Adverbally used adjectives can or are adjuncts. Karl schnarcht laut, but not all adjectives. So there are predicative adjectives that are not adjunct. Relative clauses, das Kind dem der Delfin hilft. Not all of them are adjuncts, so there are so-called free relative clauses that function as arguments. Prepositional phrases can be adjuncts. Die Frau arbeitet in Berlin, die Frau aus Berlin. Again, not all of them. We saw prepositional objects. Okay, so that's it as far as terminology goes. In the next 700 lectures of this seminar or lecture, we will deal with various grammar theories, and I just listed some of them in order of appearance. So the first was dependency grammar. Actually, I have to update this list of references here, because the first mention of dependency grammar was 1800 something. So it's really the oldest theory. And then there was categorical grammar from 35. And in the 50s, or also starting in the 30s, but formally also then in the 50s, we had phrase structure grammars, and developed from that transformational grammar, government and binding, and minimalism. So basically the Chomskyan linguistics, what people usually call mainstream generative grammar nowadays. So all the Chomskyan proposals. And then later, starting in the 70s, there were alternative suggestions, of course, heavily influenced by Chomskyan work. Tree adjoining grammar, generalized phrase structure grammar, lexical functional grammar, head-driven phrase structure grammar, and construction grammar. And all of these are discussed in the grammar theory textbook. And we will discuss most of them in what follows in the following set of lectures. So that's the first lecture so far, and thanks, and more will be coming soon.